Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from thenextreel.com.
And today we're talking about Minute 3, which begins with our scientists looking up into the stars and ends with them hitting a god with their car. Andy, what kind of jumped out at you from this minute?
Okay, so I was on a project, early in my kind of film and video career where I was working with a team that was out in the desert chasing dust devils. Now, they had a vehicle that was rigged up with all sorts of whirligigs all over it that I call them whirligigs, but, they're very scientific instruments that were all over this vehicle. And what we would do over the course of the days we were filming this project is they would chase dust devils and they would try to get their vehicle parked in the path of a dust devil so that when it went through the vehicle, it would spin all the little things on the scientific instruments all over the vehicle so that they would record all sorts of interesting data. And it was a really fun project to do just because we were doing such crazy stuff out in the middle of the desert. I had a great time. But I tell you this, they would never have let me drive their vehicle, especially if it was dark and on a stormy night in the middle of the desert.
And, I've never had that kind of experience, but I do remember from my, 8th and 9th grade biology science classes and the like, that safety in the scientific method was an important thing, and that researchers dying was generally frowned upon by, grant-making funding boards and the like. And so I'm fairly certain that grabbing the wheel from the driver and pulling it in a different direction is also generally frowned upon as part of the research scientific method. So we're definitely kind of cutting some corners here among our scientific gang. And we're going to get into more of that and all sorts of things, but we want to tell you just a quick moment about how we keep the lights on around here.
We love delivering content to our listeners that is free of ads that you don't want to hear. We also love producing this show for you, but it takes time and money. Can you become our Asgardian champion and help us out by becoming a member for this season? Membership is just $5 per month, or you can get a discount if you subscribe annually. Members get bonus content, early access to shows, access to live streams, and more. You can learn more at truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute.
So let's talk about Darcy. And I have to admit, I love this character so much. We were planning to talk about her here. We already kind of got into her last minute. I'll try to really not make this the Darcy minute by minute podcast. But here I feel like is where she really starts to shine. We get most of this minute is them driving towards the thing. And Erik seems like he's kind of just in the back, like holding on for dear life. Mostly what we have is Darcy and Jane. Jane wants to go to the science. Darcy wants to stay alive. And they're literally fighting over the wheel. What do you think we kind of learn about Darcy in this minute?
Well, first, we learned that she's doing this for college credits, right? That's, I think, an important line or an important moment and just a hilarious line. I'm not dying for 6 college credits. I love that. And this is the sort of personality that Darcy has. I love it when she says things like this in the film. And so we get that sense of Darcy. But what's interesting about Jane that we're getting is that this is, again, more proof that the team has decided we're going to really change Jane up and not make her this nurse that worked with Dr. Donald Blake. She is going to actually be a presence. And, I hate to say it when Erik calls her a storm chaser, Jane, he's kind of right. You really are the one who's driving right into the tornado here. I mean, I don't know how much that works. I would probably be like Darcy, pulling that steering wheel, trying to get away from the giant swirling cloud forming directly in front of me.
And it's fun because I feel like we learned so much about these two characters in this 1 minute, in their interaction with each other and how they play off each other. And I mean, just, one quick thing. I think the movie is now already past the Bechdel test because the two of them are having this conversation back and forth. I think there's 3 lines of dialogue. There's certainly a lot of very significant looks. And one of my favorite moments is, and we'll get to kind of what it means about Jane, but just from Darcy, she has, Jane says, get closer. And Darcy clearly says, ha, good one, as though assuming it was a joke. Right. And Jane just kind of ignores it. And then you just see this very brief look of just terror and recognition on Jane's face. And she's like, this is not physics for poets I signed up for. This is
Darcy's face.
Darcy's face, yeah. And here again, the script actually made this a lot more clear. You know, in the script, I think Darcy says, "Oh, you're joking, aren't you?" And Jane says, "No." I really appreciate it when writers and directors trust the audience to pick it up. And I love that they cut out some of the hit you over the head with it moments. And it still comes, that moment to me at least still comes through clear as day of Darcy just cannot even believe that Jane really wants to do this.
Right. Yeah. She is hardcore ready to jump into this. And, I mean, as Darcy says in the script, keep the credits. I'll intern at Burger King. Like she's just interested in surviving. I think that it's a lot of fun. But to your point, the filmmakers found a way to tighten this up so we don't need quite so much. I think what we have here gives us all we need as far as kind of that back and forth.
And we do also get the great moment of Jane, I feel like, where again, 5 seconds of facial expression says so much about her character. We get to see through the lens of her camera, which I think, as you pointed out, might be a Sony or a Panasonic. We don't quite know.
One or the other, yeah. Definitely an infrared, though.
Which, given the world of incredible product placement that the MCU is going to be steering into, I kind of like that we don't know which one it is, because there isn't a prominent shot of the tag. But, you know, we get to see through it, like the tornado hit and a kind of human figure in bright infrared in the middle of the little tornado. And there's a literal explosion. And then the look on Jane's face isn't like, oh no, what's happening? It's the like, kid at Christmas time. You know, she like laughs a little bit almost. And she's just, to me, that says so much about, like, for her, she's a real damn the torpedoes straight ahead. The science is there. And I feel like everything about that is captured right in that one moment.
Yeah. I mean, you might have better eyes than I did. I don't remember seeing the human figure in this particular, or like when it's coming down and we have the whole explosion and everything. I don't remember seeing it, but it's entirely possible that it's there. But what I do love about everything you're saying is when we see Jane's face as she is holding up the camera and like looking through it and filming all this, like she has the biggest smile of like glee and discovery, right? Like she is thrilled about what she's seeing here. She is capturing some new astronomical anomaly that is very exciting to see. And I mean, yes, it's doing things that you probably haven't seen an astral anomaly do before, like, you know, shoot a giant cloud swirl into the ground like it does, which is great. And she does show some surprise at what she's seeing, but still, for the most part, she is just thrilled about this, about the fact that, you know, she's like, you know, onto something here.
For sure. And I did just go back and kind of double check. It's right around the 32nd second. So I guess timestamp would be about like 3:29. You just see sort of this, it's this like thing of fire coming down, but it looks kind of like vaguely, it could be a human shape or it could be a cello, frankly. But there's definitely sort of like, it looks like a smaller circle on the top and then kind of like two bigger circles below it. And so that's what I mean by the vaguely humanoid shape. Like it's not a definite human, but it feels like something that shouldn't be at the heart of a tornado, to be sure. And I feel like that's part of what Jane gets so excited about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to kind of be seeing and to be afraid of, as Darcy clearly is.
Right. Now, what do you think is happening in this moment? I think you put out our notes that this is kind of the most explosive and grand trip through the Bifrost we ever see.
Yeah.
And here's where I'm not sure I understand the science of Asgard, because, well, I mean, they walk literally across the Bifrost sometimes, but then other times they just have the Bifrost seems kind of like a beam me up, Scotty kind of a thing. And kind of, I guess that's what's happening here, right? It's that Odin was able, as we learn later, to kind of just open up this gateway, and that's always the Bifrost that they're traveling through.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting element. I mean, you have an element of this rainbow bridge literally in Asgard that goes from like the palace down to the observatory where Heimdall is, right? That they ride across, that we'll certainly be talking about more as we see it in the course of this film. But it's like once you get to that observatory where Heimdall is and he opens up the Bifrost and he uses his swords to kind of point it to the right direction. When the people go into it, it's almost like they're beaming through a rainbow is kind of how it's depicted in the film.
Right.
It's not like they're riding on a bridge, like a literal bridge on the first half of it. It literally is like being beamed, which is very interesting. And I can't wait to talk about that a lot more as we will. So the only thing that I can think of in this particular case is that it's because it's being operated a little differently, right? As we'll learn, Odin is operating it not with Heimdall's sword, but with with Odin's staff, Gungdal. He's using his staff, which now we know, or we will learn at that point, can control the Bifrost. And he's doing something that is very different. Like he's actually casting someone out. He's like forcibly pushing somebody through the Bifrost to Earth, as opposed to somebody willingly saying, I want to go there. So I was thinking maybe it's involved in the way that it happens, that it's such a forceful being cast out that creates such a funnel cloud the likes of which we've never seen.
Kind of going back to what we were discussing yesterday when we talked about why is it New Mexico specifically. Again, I can headcanon anything. I wonder if maybe Odin is picked, because it could well be just sort of like, all right, straight path to Earth. You're just going to hit whatever part of Earth is closest to us in the rotation at that moment. But I do wonder if maybe there's a thought of if we send him to Norway, if we send him to Minnesota, if we send him to a place where they all know the Norse gods, it's not going to be as hard for him. We want to send him to a place where no one's going to be like, oh, a Norse god. That's what we all think about here in New Mexico.
Yeah.
We'll get into later the just wonderfully helpful coincidence that we happen to have a scientist on hand who grew up learning Norse mythology, but that's, a coincidence we'll discuss in later parts of the movie.
I think that there's an interesting element of the fact that he is ending up in a place that is so vastly different from generally what we think of as Norway. At least in my head, I usually think of it in buried in snow. And here we have it, it's very dry, it's very deserty. And, I don't know about you, I live in the desert currently, and, we will have these periodic haboobs roll through where it's like this giant dust storm. And I tell you, when you're in these dust storms, you go a lot slower, you be a lot more cautious because you really can't see more than 10 feet in front of where you are. Right. And so, I do think that Darcy's being very smart. And because the last thing I would want is to be driving during a dust storm only to have a figure rise up in front of me that I just couldn't see because they were 10 feet away from me.
Well, especially because, as it turns out, even if Jane's goal is to get as close to the science as possible so that we can study the science, I generally believe that running over the science with your car tends to adversely affect scientific results, Exactly. If it had been, there was this, thing that landed in the desert, and now, the markings and, the pattern of the sand being blown in different directions, driving over that with your car is not going to be good for the scientific process, So I think it does sort of fit this idea of Jane as kind of in a nice way. She's not the world's perfect scientist. She's the person who's so excited that she's kind of tripping over her own feet to get there.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is great is I do Selvig, as I said, mostly kind of literally takes the back seat while the two women are kind of deciding what's going to happen. But I do like that his the one line he gets that's really memorable is he says, I thought you said this was a subtle aurora. Because to me, what you get there is, yes, he's skeptical, yes, he's cynical, but now the moment that something has happened, he's done a 180. Now he's fully on board with her. He's not, he could just be like, oh, well, it's still just an aurora. Maybe you're wrong. He's just like, oh, okay, cool. The thing you were looking for is here. Let's talk about it because it's actually so much more than even you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do want to just justify a little bit with Jane. I want to look at it from her perspective. Okay. As I said at the beginning of the episode, having worked with scientists who had a vehicle that was designed to drive into something. Now, I don't think Jane necessarily knew she would be driving into something. My understanding is she was just going to be recording these anomalies as they happened in the sky, as they should have been. But still, I like to think that because this anomaly is happening, and she has this magnetometer that she's attached to the top of the van. As she drives into it, I would like to think that what it's doing, and we'll actually have evidence of this later, that it's recording something. It's actually creating some recordings of what is happening. And I think that's probably why she wanted to drive into it, so that she could actually get these readings as close as possible to the object. So just, playing devil's advocate here.
And I get that. I have an aunt and uncle who met because they both thought a fun job was to drive small little airplanes into the middle of tornadoes. So, clearly, and hurricanes. Clearly, this is the thing that happens.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think the idea of, well, if you're an astronomer, an astrophysicist, and you're studying the thing happening in the sky, worrying about what happens when the thing in the sky crash lands to Earth and you might hit it, you're right, probably not part of the thought consideration there.
Yeah, not exactly. Not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'd like to also think that as a responsible scientist who is bringing on interns to help her, that she would have also had those conversations with her interns to say, these are the sorts of things that we may be doing. I want to make sure you're prepared for that.
There, I'm at least going to, I'm not going to blame Jane for that, because I think Darcy is 100% the sort who would be like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And just,
true.
completely ignore it, especially in a moment of danger.
Well, and again, to that point, like, this is not the sort of anomaly they were expecting, right? Like, all these anomalies have been things that have happened in the sky. They've all been these subtle auroras, as Erik reminds her. So the fact that this is some totally different type of anomaly, and again, to the point that you had last time about the fact that this likely wasn't what Jane had actually been waiting for. It's something that just circumstantially happened to happen at the exact same time. But it's like, something is coming down from the heavens. And I think that it is a totally different type of thing that none of them really would have been waiting for. So,
this is a couple of paleontologists who think they've discovered a place where, like, a dinosaur bone might be dug up. And it turns out they actually walked into Jurassic Park. Clearly This is a level beyond what they're expecting.
Right. Exactly.
Now, as I think it's going to be a theme throughout this minute, I think we really have a lot of the story is told not just in the dialogue or the actors or the visuals, but in the sound. What are some of the sound cues that you picked up on this minute that really help kind of inform us about what's happening now?
What I love about the way that they play with this particular atmospheric disturbance is because, if anyone's looked at the aurora borealis, it doesn't make any sound. It's up there and you look at it, but you don't hear twinkling or anything like that. This particular atmospheric disturbance, we are hearing like this kind of whooshing sound that kind of is growing, and this rumble that starts kind of growing like a thunder sort of sound, which actually ties nicely into what it is actually delivering. But it actually feels much more like a storm. Like you right. actually feel like that there are sounds of a storm brewing, and that is much more what it feels like. Plus, Patrick Doyle's music playing. So all of that, I think, very effectively tells us this is something more.
Yeah, I really love a movie where you can watch it the first time, and some things maybe subconsciously hit you, but you don't really pick up on them. And then once you kind of know the thing that's building to, you go back and you're like, oh my God, that thing I missed, but it's there and it's so beautiful and subtle. And so the fact that right at the end, you hear the sound that we'll later know is the sound of the Bifrost closing,
right.
It's just, to me, such a brilliant, because I had never heard what a Bifrost sounds when it closes before I watched this movie. So, of course, I didn't make that connection. And I don't even think that when I heard the Bifrost actually connect, my brain didn't jump back to 3 seconds of audio I heard half an hour beforehand in the movie. But knowing what that sounds like, then when I went back and watched it again, I was like, oh yeah, that is what I'm hearing. That's really cool. And I just love little details like that.
And what I think they do very effectively here is the filmmakers, Kenneth Branagh, the effects team, the sound design team. Going back to our point, what we've been saying quite often so far is that it all feels kind of like a scientific thing that is actually happening. And nothing seems magical, right? It just seems like a storm that appears very quickly out of the blue. It looks like a tornado funnel cloud that kind of forms from this kind of appearance in the sky, comes down to Earth, and it's just whirling and swirling. It feels like a very sudden, I wouldn't say that it's scientifically probable, but that's what it feels like, a scientific, some sort of electrical tornado storm that suddenly appeared in the desert. It doesn't feel like out of the realm of possibility.
I think that's such a good point you bring up, because it also establishes something that's going to become a foundational idea of the MCU, and was really a foundational idea of some of the comics, though the MCU, I think, leans into it a lot more. And it's one that, to me, as as I mentioned, I have a theological background, a very progressive, liberal perspective, and a very science-focused one. And in that school of like where theology can meet science, there's often this sort of idea of, and something I think you can see a lot if you study history, that magic or religion often exists in the world of the things that humanity has not yet scientifically figured out. So at a time when no one has any idea why the sun actually is pulled across the sky, people think, okay, maybe it's a god with his chariot and his horses or something like that. And maybe that's what controls the tides, a moon goddess or whatever. And I think that's an idea. Einstein, who was actually a very religious Jewish man, he wrote wonderful things about this concept of like studying the universe because of this idea of that the next thing over the horizon is where God lives. I think he said something like that, but that we always push that lens. And I feel like the MCU really leans into that with this idea of whatever we today think is religion or magic, there is a scientific understanding for it. We just haven't figured it out yet. And I feel like that's very much a part of what we're going to learn, is that these aren't actual gods. They are people who have a scientific level of advancement wildly beyond ours. And so because it's so hard for the human brain, especially in 800 or the 8th century, whenever it was that they last had contact with humans in Norway, in Scandinavia, that people thought of them as gods. They think of it as magic. But to them, it all does have a scientific explanation. And it's fun to kind of know, like, to me, I think a lot of the more mystical sides of the MCU, I might not have connected enough as much to if they didn't have that grounding, because it would have felt too like way up in the clouds. And so I love that, like, this is the moment where that first starts to get introduced of everything that's happening to these people. It might look crazy. It might look totally out there, but it is the scientists who discover it. It's not just a random shopkeeper. It's not a nurse who would really think this is just magic. It is scientifically minded people who first discover it. And I feel like it's funny that is going to be wind up being a foundational moment for the entire MCU going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly in this film, because, I mean, that very point is discussed in more depth as we kind of hit a point in this film where they're having a conversation about it. So I find that really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to, even in the next couple minutes, discussing more about, the difference between Asgardians and Midgardians and all of the different ways that these beings exist. So it's going to be allow for some fun conversations.
So we don't actually need to hit the 30-minute mark in every episode. I think in this minute, there's a lot of it is just kind of driving. It's a lot of character moments. Is there any other kind of last things about this episode you wanted to get into?
Not really. I'm excited to talk about this mysterious dark figure in the blowing dust and that they hit with their car, which we will certainly talk about more.
Who could that be? Minute. What a mystery!
Exactly.
Andy, as always, I love the stuff you're bringing. I'm learning so much about this. I hope this is true of all of our listeners. I hope you're getting so much out of this. I hope you're participating in all the social media and the Discord and the ways to be a part of the conversation. But more than anything, I'm glad you're listening. Thank you so much for the support, and have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.